So I'll try to post pictures in this video along with the video to show you what I'm talking about. But when I purchased this axle from a local junkyard, they sold me the whole front Ford frame section. It was everything from the radius arm mount forward, and so I was able to cut these coil spring buckets off of the Ford frame. I took the radius arm mounts off of the Ford frame. I reused as much as I could, and then the track bar mount I made out of some 3/8 angle. Just cut it up, punched a couple holes in it, and welded it up to the frame. That's nice and stout. And then the only thing I purchased for this axle swap was this pitman arm. This is a WFO pitman arm from the GM Gearbox to the Ford Draglink. And that's really high quality part there. Only thing I bought for this whole swap. Everything else was reused off of the Ford. These coil spring buckets I'm going to cut off even with my frame. I probably should have done that before I had welded them all up, but if I'm not going to do it now, but if any point I have this coil spring back out, I'm gonna get in there and cut it off. It'd be too big of a pain in the butt right now, and it's not really hurting anything. It just looks ugly. And I did purchase new shocks, but you know, that's nothing. Then for the radius arm mount, you come back here. This is all the factory Ford radius arm mount. I'm going to cut off this front bit here because it tapers in and doesn't line up with the frame. Now, the Ford frame is narrower than the Chevy frame. So these sit just on the inside of the frame rail on both sides. And as for where the coil purchase sit, the Ford frame is about 1/2 inch overall wider than the Chevy frame. So I filled that gap with plating to bring my coil purchase farther out on each side. And then I do plan on building a cross member from mount to mount. I'm going to try to make it removable. The only reason I haven't yet is because I was also doing this NV 4500 swap on this truck. I did have the 4L80E in, so like I had to get my front axle all mounted up so I could set this thing back on the ground and easily get the transmission and transfer case mounted. But that's a different video, different story. So radius arm mounts, these come off the Ford frame, you know, like a C, and then the top comes over and goes up in an L, and then this side is just flat. So these are two separate pieces that, well, I say separate, they're connected back here, but this top and what would come off of this side are separated. I cut those both off, welded it right to my frame. Say what you want about my welds, I don't care. As for measurements, everybody's will be different. It depends on how far forward you want your axle to set. I wanted mine to set 2 inches farther forward than where the center line of the GM independent suspension was. So, I mean, it's hard to see visibly, but just picture this tire being 2 inches farther back. So, to get it all centered up, I left the radius arms mounted onto here, rolled it back underneath my frame, took measurements off of the back of this little perch here to my frame on each side, and just shifted the axle back and forth until I got it centered. And what's really important about this track bar is you don't build this mount until your axle is completely centered. You've got it exactly where you want it. And then you have the truck sitting at ride height or down on the ground, whatever, with the coil springs in. Because if you build this track arm mount, before you're centered or anything, this is going to want to keep the axle in center as it's traveling. So, say you build it without your springs in, you got the truck way up in the air. Well, whenever you drop it down, this is going to shove your front differential over to the passenger side, and you don't want that. So I waited until everything else was done before I built this. The only issue I think I'm going to have is with this drag link here. I can rotate that mount up out of the way, but I think for now, whenever I turn the tires like all the way to the driver's side, those clamps are going to hit the track arm mount, but it's not a big deal. I should be able to rotate the clamps and not have to worry about that. The only thing I really have left to do is, like I said, the brake lines and get my alignment straight. Obviously the pitman arm's sitting way off to one side. I want to get it centered. I did center the gearbox before I installed the pitman arm, and then I just turned it over to where the link met up with it. And there's a lot of videos on how to center your gearbox. Before you do anything like this, it's pretty simple. You turn it to turn your wheel, or you can pull the gearbox out if you want, and turn it with where the steering shaft would come in all the way to one side, and then count your rotations all the way to the other side, divide that by 2, and then turn it, whatever that number you get divided by 2, you turn it that amount of rotations back, and then that should be dead center of where your worm gear and stuff line up in the gearbox. So yeah, just some really basic information. If in mine might turn out different than how yours will turn out, I don't know. If you can tell by that massive oil pan, this has a 12 valve Cummins in it. So stuff lines up differently. I already had certain things cut out of the way to do my 12 valve swap, so but I've seen a couple other guys do an axle swap extremely similar to this. Don't think that you have to go out and buy the $2,500, $3,500 kit to swap a solid axle in your truck. I did this. So I bought this front axle and that Ford rear right there for $850, and that came with the front Ford frame section. So cut that in half. $425 roughly is what I gave for the axle, the buckets, the radius arm mounts, all of that. And then I gave $110, I believe, for the pitman arm. So without time and material, I can say that I'm less than $600 in a solid axle swap on this truck. So you don't have to spend a lot of money. It does, I will say, it does look a lot better with WFO's 4-link kit, or even the radius arm kit and their coil buckets and all that stuff. That does look really nice, but it's not necessary. if you just want functionality over looks, and if you can tell by 90% of the rest of the truck, that's what I'm all for, is functionality over looks. So yeah, so there you have it. If there's anything I haven't really answered, I'm just not going to give specific measurements, because I don't want somebody to watch this and me say, okay, you need to put this right here, and they put it right there and it turns out differently for them. So, you know, I don't want to give out bad information. But if you do have any questions related to this, ask them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer. I try to answer all the questions, unless they're, you know, just ridiculous. One that I'm sure people would say, why'd you use a Ford axle? I used the Ford because it was the easiest thing to do, and I'll just visibly show you why. I picked the Ford over the Dodge, or even an older Chevy, because I wanted the coil springs. And so you'll say, well, why didn't you use a Dodge? Well, this is an 03 Dodge axle right here. The coil springs on this axle sit too close together. I think it was like, I couldn't even give you an exact measurement, but I just remember where these perches sit is directly underneath the frame on the Chevy. So just in order to mount this, I'd have to cut the perches off, shift them farther out, and then they'd be over the knuckle. It'd be sitting really high up in the air. The truck's already a lot higher than I necessarily wanted it to set, but that's where everything worked out. So with my swap right now, I'm at roughly 3.5, 4 inches of lift, and I really didn't want any lift. And with this Dodge axle, I would have had to have like 6 inches of lift just to clear it. And then, you know, their factory control arm set up, I don't really like that, so I would have cut away all that and just redone everything. With the Ford coil buckets and radius arms, I was able to just mount everything in and not have to do a ton of work to get it done. So there you have it.